and welcome to day 7. Well done. You've made it to the end of Market Leadership Week, and perhaps even more importantly, you've managed through my day 6 mega, slightly more than half an hour, sorry about that, session. But wasn't it cool? And I hope that is the overarching lesson that you've received this week, that indeed this stuff is cool, it's easy to do, it's fun to do, and it makes such a difference. You know, to me, when you talk about gaining influence in a market and you practice market leadership, this is the secret weapon. This is the way that you as an individual can do so much in a marketplace. So I'm going to take it really easy on you today, and let's just do a quick recap of what we learned during the week. And then I just want to highlight a couple of key things and some tips and tricks, if you will. So, obviously day 1, I defined market leadership, and the key thing about market leadership was that it's not a gift. It's not something that you should be fearful of. It's not something that you should be terrified of. And indeed, market leadership was simply the practice of producing content using some form of media and doing it on a consistent basis and releasing it into the marketplace. I also introduced you to the concept of the top 20 influencers in a marketplace. If there was a secret weapon, if there was a magic bullet, if people forced me to say that there was, I would say that being one of the top 20 influencers in your marketplace is that silver bullet, is that sort of major advantage. And it takes time to do, but boy, you get there, and it's extremely powerful, as we described. And then, of course, on day 2, Sam Vidovine took us through competitor analysis. It's funny, when I look at competitors and competitor analysis, to me, I don't often see people as competitors online. In the markets that I operate in, I see people who are in that marketplace as potential JV partners more than I do competitors. But it is important for you to have a knowledge of who's who in the zoo. If you're going to be inside a market, you need to have that knowledge. Then on day 3, Paul Colligan, my colleague on Internet Marketing This Week, our podcast, talked about Google Readers and Alerts. Wasn't that awesome? You will come to love Google Reader. Google Reader for me is my secret weapon. It's sort of like this on-the-fly dynamic Encyclopedia Britannica that is always there and is always updating, and your knowledge is always updating. Because remember, all of that content that you save in Google Reader is searchable, whether you delete it or mark it as read or not. So it's like you're building this encyclopedia just about the niches that you are interested in, and of course the hobbies that you're interested in as well. Then my other colleague from Internet Marketing This Week podcast, and of course my co-creator with Always Be Shipping, our market leadership big course that we created, was Michelle McPherson. And she took you over a couple of days on day 4 and 5. She showed you how to establish who those key players were in a market, who those market influencers are, and then talked to you and showed you a number of methods for curation in a marketplace. And curation is really the first step. It's a powerful step. People underestimate the power. If you become a really good curator in your niche, you become a person of influence. Because if people come to you to get their daily fill of what's going on in a particular marketplace, that is an extremely powerful place to be. And then, of course, yesterday, day 6, I told you about the key tools that I used. I showed you my morning and evening routines. And for me, I hope you saw that I've almost turned my practice of market leadership into a video game. It's such an enjoyable part of my day. In fact, if there's a danger, it can become too enjoyable. So I wanted to show you the tools that I use and the way that I use them, just to show that you could do this away from your computer. You can do this standing up. You don't have to be tied to your computer. And indeed, as we'll soon discover, I don't think you should be tied to your computer. If there's one thing that, when I talk about market leadership, people get it. They get it as the concept. They understand how important it is. But they're terrified of it because, unfortunately, the phrase leadership or the phrase influence has negative connotations. And we discussed this back in day one. But I just want to emphasize now that you can choose how to influence your market. You can choose the media. You can choose your weapon. If you are shy and you never consider, like I'm doing here, you can't see my face, but I am using a keynote presentation here and delivering the content. If that's something that makes you comfortable, then use that as your media. If you prefer to write, then write. If you're like me and a bit terrified of writing, then maybe do videos, do podcasts, but do something. Unless you are putting content, unless you are contributing into a marketplace, unless you are putting in content that matters, you're never going to become an influencer. You're never going to become a market leader. Now, the other big thing, of course, is people consider themselves shy. They consider themselves, they don't want to deal with people. And I constantly remind people that there are two types of influence. There's that very obvious public in-your-face influence, and there's also those people who quietly go about influencing entire markets and jobs and people that people have never heard of. And that is so important for you to remember. So find something that makes it comfortable for you. Find media that you're comfortable with, and find your voice and find your approach. If it's a public from the front approach, great. That's no better or no worse than somebody who wants to influence from behind the scenes. So keep that in mind. That's a big lesson this week. You can do this. None of these activities, we teach people, and we've done it for years now. Michelle and I have done the teaching with Always Be Shipping, where we teach you every single step of this. It's teachable. It's learnable. It is not a gift. Creativity is not a gift, it's a habit. And by doing this every day, you are going to get there. And in fact, speaking of every day and practice, it's a very big question that I get. Well, Ed, this market leadership stuff sounds all great, but I really don't know whether I'm going to be involved in this market yet. And I suppose we're asking to scratch the surface because, who knows, but prior to the last few weeks, you may not have even heard of this market before. That's okay. Here's a big tip. I encourage you to practice your market leadership and influence skills on your favorite hobby. This is a really, really, really cool thing to do because you're doing it in something you enjoy, you do it in something you're passionate about, and you never know, you're like in a big city. It may turn into something that's bigger than just being a hobby. I am interested in photography. I'm obviously interested in using iPads and iPhones for business. And I don't make my money in either of those markets. But I have enjoyed practicing my market leadership skills in that market. I'm actually on the books for Getty Photography, which is a huge honour, even though I am not a professional photographer by any stretch of the imagination. And the reason I attracted their attention was by practicing market leadership, putting up a photo every day, just like my dear friend Bill Wadman did with his 365 portrait project. So practice. A big tip is, if you don't want to do this on a niche because you just haven't decided that you're going to commit to that niche yet, then do it with a hobby. It's a great way of doing it. Now, speaking of Bill and 365, you might remember on the first day I talked to you about a very unique brand of market leadership and influence called the 365 Project. And remember, I talked about Bill Wadman and the Happiness Project, and of course one of the most famous, it was so famous it was made a movie, which was of course Julia and Julia. Now, I'm talking to people here. We have literally tens and tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people doing the challenge at the moment with you. There's going to be a group of you who have dedicated your lives to something, that are intensely passionate about something, and regardless of the financial ramifications, in fact, they're immaterial. You just want to be somebody who is an influencer and makes a difference and makes an impact in that marketplace. If I'm talking to you right now, I would like you to seriously consider a 365 project, because you can't do it for money. I could never teach it as a money-making process. Indeed, if you start a 365 project with a aim of making money out of it, in all the interviews I've done with all the people who've done 365 projects, not one of them started out with a view to making money, even though some of them ended up creating whole careers and indeed making a lot of money out of it. But that was not the motivation. The motivation was a personal challenge, and if nothing happened other than they did what they challenged themselves to do for 365 days, that was all the congratulations, that was all the praise that they needed. So for me, if you are intensely passionate about a particular area, or you do want to challenge yourself, then a 365 project is a brilliant way to do it. And everything you've learnt this week is something that you can apply. And as I said, you never know your luck in a big city. I tell you, every person who has started and maintained and finished a 365 project, and I mean really got through it more than 2 months, 3 months in, you'd be amazed at what happened to them. Stuff that they could never have expected, stuff that they could have never planned for. So seriously, if that's you, give real serious consideration to a 365 project. Now, a final word of warning with all of this stuff. As you saw yesterday, I have a bit of fun doing market leadership. I love this stuff. I love it. I love social media. I love that. Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. Just remember, you don't make one single dollar directly off practicing market leadership. This is not something that you do in your critical focus time. If you're writing an article, you're writing an article for putting on your blog. That's something that you're putting out there. That is practicing market leadership. But all the curation and all the, just staying in touch with your market, all these techniques that you've learnt this week, as I've often say, practice those things standing up away from your computer. When you're in front of your computer at work, particularly I'm talking to people who have a, pretty intense 9-to-5 job, and you're doing this, you're listening to me now, could be late at night, where you've carved out half an hour to do the challenge. I'm particularly talking to you. You do not want to get caught up and sucked in to thinking that doing all this curation stuff is building your business, because it doesn't. Everything else that we've taught you in the first 4 modules is that. Okay, this is icing on the cake. Indeed, it may well be some of the most important work that you ever do, but understand its place. And let me give you a little story. I did run, it's closed now, a mentoring program, and it was wonderful, and I learnt so much. But one of the biggest things I saw was people who had a really, intense job, and they come home and they try to do backlinking, hour after hour of backlinking. And you can do it for a while, and indeed you should do it for a while. But it can become, the equivalent of some sort of religious ceremony where you are, going home and you're getting, slapped in the face with a fish every couple of minutes. You have to mix things up. You have to follow. And we deliberately do this with the challenge too, I might add. We do try to go for variety, and we do try to, create a process which gives you the consistency and the discipline to do this, with the ability to keep it different for you, so you keep fresh, so you keep excited. It's funny, we need to have both. So while I say don't get caught down the rabbit hole with the social media, those half hours, like you're listening to me now, treat them as precious. Use them as action-based activity. Use curation, just like I did for the commercial breaks when you're watching your favourite reality TV program. I'm not one of these people who tells you to shut off your TV. I'd be a hypocrite. I love TV. But I use it, use my Flipboard on iPad for, during the commercials. that to me is a great use of time. So just keep in mind, when you've carved out a precious half hour to do some work, do work. Very, very important. And that goes to my final point, that the most powerful thing, if you learn one thing throughout this entire challenge, is the power of consistency, the power of the streak. It's much better, and again, you've heard me say this a bunch of times over this entire challenge, and you'll hear me say it again. I'd much rather you spend half an hour, 5 days a week, religiously doing this than, crunching 8 hours into a weekend here and then missing a week and then doing another 4 hours here and then missing 2 weeks and doing another 2 hours. It's consistency that gets you the medal. That picture there is my first running medal. I set myself a challenge this past year that in January I had never run more than 20 yards. Never, ever in my life. And I set myself the goal, because I've got to get fit, I'm getting on, and I've got plenty of podcasts I want to listen to, that I wanted to be able to run a 5K race. And sure enough, in July of this year, I not only ran the 5K race, but I actually came in the top third for my age group, which I was just really flabbergasted by, bluntly. And the only way I did that, the only way I successfully completed that, and I'm in training now for a 10 kilometre, is following a program. It was called Couch to 5K. And it was 3 days a week, and you had to be consistent, because if you skipped, you were in trouble, because you didn't build up the stamina, you didn't build up the endurance, you didn't build up the muscles. And those lessons in running are so crucial for what you're doing here today. It's so crucial in the challenge. And market leadership is about consistency. The challenge is about consistency. Your online business is about consistency. Creating an app is about consistency. Consistency is what champions do. Consistency is what the most successful people I know in online business do. That's what you need to do. If you're consistent, if you show up to do this stuff each day on a consistent basis, you will achieve something. You will get somewhere. And I hope this market leadership module has inspired you to that. Best of luck. I'll speak to you later in the program, and enjoy Module 6.